It's Sandra here from Creating Spain. Excuse me, a bit foggy this morning. Today I'm going to show you a really simple effect which provides a nice highlight to a card but can sometimes cause a few issues. That effect is faux stitching. Now you may have tried doing faux stitching before by printing it, and that can work fine. But for example, you might have a card that you're thinking, well, actually I wish I'd put some faux stitching on that, and you've already cut the card out, maybe you've added something to it already, and you can't put it through the printer, so that would cause you a bit of an aggravation. So I'm going to show you how to make a faux stitching stencil, or indeed possibly an embossing plate for your embossing machine, depending on which one you would like to do. Okay, so I have used the circle tool to make some very small ovals, a bit like a grain of rice. But alternatively, you could use the rounded rectangle tool to do something very similar. So you have a choice of very slightly different shapes. So, excuse my cat whinging there. So you have a choice of shapes, and it's just personal preference as to which one you like. And all you have to do with these is to select one, and I'll go for this one since it's already selected, and then choose your object for it to go round or go in, whichever the case may be. Now, obviously, if you're doing a card and this is the outer edge of your card, for example, or the piece that you're going to stick onto your card, whichever it may be, then this will need to go inside. But the method is done in pretty much the same way. Just going to close this shapes window down. You go to the effects tool, you go to the object on path, and you simply start to use the auto preview. So that'll show you that you've got the correct object selected on top. Otherwise you'll have this one going around the smaller path. That wouldn't be too clever. And you can either choose count and simply do this, or you can choose the other option, which is fill the path length. At the moment I have far too many stitches in here because there's no gap, so I can set the gap, and I'm going to put this up to about 40. There we go, I think that's reasonable. But I want this to go inside my rectangle and not outside it, so bring them in a bit. There we go. Now you notice I now have some extra ones that I don't necessarily want. So I'm just going to click OK. And I'm going to see if this is grouped or not. Yeah, it's grouped. So I'm going to select that, right click, and I'm going to break it apart. And I'm going to see if I can now select one of these. So I've got two of them there, just want to select one. There we go, and I just want to press the delete button to get rid of it. Now, depending on the shape and the size of both your stitches and your object, you may need to alter this very slightly, even after taking some of these bits out. For example, you may think, okay, this side is fine, I'm quite happy with that side, but this side looks a bit short to me. So what I would do is I would move one of these to where I wanted it to start. Grab that one. Just going to use my arrow keys to move it up a little bit and just check. Yeah, that's about right. And I want to move my arrow key on this one to move that one down a bit. And let's see. Yeah, okay. Now if I'm happy with that, all I need to do, oops, too wide. All I need to do is select just my row here, and then go to Object, Distribute, And in this particular case, it is distribute the space vertically. There we go, that one there. And that will distribute those evenly along that line. So if need be, you can do that to all your various lines. Now, what do we do if we have a circle? Very similar. Take it over to our circle. And this time I'm going to go to Object on Path. And I am going to choose Warp to Path because I am putting a straight object on a curved path. So I want this to slightly curve that object. So I'm going to click on the Warp to Path. And you won't see anything at the moment. Turn on the preview. Whoops. That's the reason it's done that is because it has decided that the bigger circle there is actually the uppermost object. Okay, so I'm going to take that one, right click, arrange, and bring it to the front, and that should sort that out. Okay, let's start again. Effects, Object on Path, and Auto Preview. There we are. It's moved it now, so I know that is the correct one. Warp to Path, and then I'm going to go for a slight offset to the outside. There we go. And I'm assuming that this is going to be a window, you see, in my front. And so I'm now just going to go like that. Right, okay, I've not set my spacer. So I want to set that to 40, I think. And just continue the count until I meet the end. There we go, and I'm happy with that. I could, of course, have done it to the inside and reverse that offset to the inside, not the outside. Now, from a point of view of simply doing the stitching, if I take this circle out and I take this rectangle out, and I'm going to make sure these are grouped. Yeah, they're grouped already, and I'm going to make sure these are grouped, and they probably aren't because I ungrouped them. There we go, so they're now grouped. So from a point of view of simply doing a file for the stitching, all I would do is place one inside the other. Now, this is obviously way too big at the moment for that. So I'm just going to decrease the size. And I'm going to put that inside there. There we go. And I'm now just going to centre it because I decided I wanted it in the centre of that. So that would be, I'm going to group that. That would be just my stitch file. Now, if you wanted to cut this out as a stencil, that would be all you need to cut out. You can put a border around it if your card or acetate, whatever you're using to make your stencil, is too big. But that would basically be your stencil file. Now, if I wanted to make this into a stitch plate, then I would have to do something just a little bit different. Now, if I had, I've got another cat here wailing at me. If I just had this as my file, then I wouldn't be cutting the hole in the middle. So I would need to cut a hole in the middle. And I'm just going to undo that because I didn't have the tick on my keep proportions to keep it circular. So I make my circle smaller. And it's still not quite small enough, so make it a little smaller again. Okay, yeah, I think that's fine. And then I would want my cut edge to be lined up as well. And I'm just going to center all of those items so they're all centered up. So I basically have there my outer edge cut, my stitch line cut, my stitches around the centre. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. My stitches around the centre, and indeed the hole. Now that would be what I would class as a file suitable for doing an emboss. However, one thing I would say is that if you're embossing, if you keep that outer rectangle to that size, if your paper is actually bigger than that, you're going to end up with an embossed edge on it, which is probably not what you'd want to do. What I would do in this particular case is to make that a lot bigger, certainly bigger than my paper size. Make it as big as my embossing machine would actually allow widthwise. And then I would know that my paper, when it was in there, was actually going to be unaffected by the outer edge. Now, the difficulty that that file would give you is that you would have very little in the way of guideline as to lining it up to make sure your edges were true. So what I would recommend that you do is you copy this rectangle, but instead of making it a cut line, you simply make it a drawing line. And that way you can draw a rectangle the size of the paper that this is going to be suited for. Around here, centre it up, and you've got a draw line to use for actually framing things up and making sure positions are correct. Okay, so excuse me for croaking here. So that is basically it. The fun thing with this is if you do make a stencil out of it, you can use a stencil with pens, yes. You can do gold stitching, silver stitching, whatever colour you like. You can also use it to use a glue. So if you've got one of the very fine glue pens like the Zig, or I think Sakura do a fine tip glue pen, you can actually do that. Let it dry very slightly and then you can foil it. So that's another interesting thing that you can actually do. Or indeed, if you cut out these holes and you make them ever so slightly bigger, then perhaps you can thread wool or a very fine ribbon or a cord or something like that through them. And so there are various variations that you can have. Just use your imagination. And I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.